The examination revealed something extraordinary. Despite being on the streets for a week, Scout was in remarkable physical condition. His coat, once clean, was healthy and shiny. His weight, while slightly low, was not dangerously so. His teeth were clean, his eyes bright, his spirit unbroken. But more than that, Dr. Martinez observed something she had never seen in her 15 years of veterinary practice. Scout exhibited behaviors that suggested he was not just surviving his abandonment, he was thriving in it. As she watched Scout interact with the small group of people who had gathered around him, Dr. Martinez realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. The dog was not displaying the typical signs of abandonment trauma. Instead, he was displaying the characteristics of a therapy animal, instinctively providing comfort and connection to those who needed it most. But he had received no training for this role. It was as if he had been born knowing how to heal the wounds that abandonment creates. Dr. Martinez spent the entire morning in the alley, not just examining Scout, but observing the community that had formed around him. She watched Mrs. Chun's face light up when she talked to Scout about her garden. She saw Marcus's shoulders relax as he shared his homework struggles with a non-judgmental listener. She noticed how Janet seemed more grounded, more present, when Scout was nearby. She witnessed Mr. Rodriguez speak more words in one morning than he probably spoke in an entire week. The truth began to reveal itself in that moment. The truth that no one had told anyone about abandoned dogs. The truth that Scout had somehow always known. Sometimes being abandoned isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of a different kind of purpose. Sometimes what looks like tragedy is actually transformation. Dr. Martinez had spent her career believing that abandoned animals were victims waiting for rescue. But Scout showed her that some abandoned animals become rescuers themselves. They become the bridges between broken humans and the healing they desperately need. They become the teachers who show us that love doesn't require a perfect situation, that loyalty doesn't require a permanent home, that family doesn't require blood or adoption papers. Scout hadn't been abandoned by his family. He had been released into his true calling. His original family had loved him enough to let him go, even though it broke their hearts. And in letting him go, they had given him the opportunity to touch lives in ways they never could have imagined. Scout's real family wasn't the one that had driven away in tears. His real family was the collection of broken souls who had found healing in his presence. The story took its final turn when Dr. Martinez made an unprecedented decision. Instead of trying to remove Scout from his alley, she decided to support him there. She arranged for regular health checkups, provided food and supplies, and most importantly, she documented what was happening. She began to share Scout's story with other veterinarians, with animal behaviorists, with anyone who would listen. What she discovered was that Scout was not unique. Around the world, there were other animals who had transformed their abandonment into purpose. Dogs who had appointed themselves guardians of homeless camps. Cats who had become emotional support for nursing home residents. Animals who had found their way to exactly where they were needed most, not through human intervention, but through their own instinctive understanding of love and loyalty. The truth about abandoned dogs, Scout taught her, is that they often understand something about love that humans have forgotten. They understand that love is not about possession or permanence. They understand that loyalty is not about staying in one place, but about being present wherever they are needed. They understand that family is not defined by who keeps you, but by who you choose to serve. Scout's story spread beyond the alley, beyond the city, beyond what anyone had expected. People began to visit, not to rescue him, but to learn from him. They came to understand that sometimes the most profound healing happens not in perfect situations, but in the spaces between abandonment and belonging. They learned that sometimes the most important work is done by those who have been discarded by society. Mrs. Chun's flower shop became a gathering place for people who had heard Scout's story. Marcus started a support group for teenagers dealing with abandonment issues. Janet found her way to mental health services, motivated by Scout's example of finding purpose in difficult circumstances. Mr. Rodriguez began volunteering at the local community center, sharing his own story of loneliness and healing. Scout had created something that social workers and therapists have been trying to achieve for decades. He had created a community of healing centered around the shared experience of abandonment. He had shown that sometimes the most broken places are where the most beautiful things grow. The alley behind Morrison's grocery store was transformed. The broken glass was cleaned up. The dumpster was moved to a less prominent location. Small plants began to grow in the spaces between the concrete. Mrs. Chun donated flowers that bloomed in unlikely places. Marcus organized neighborhood cleanup efforts. Janet used her street knowledge to help other homeless individuals find resources. Mr. Rodriguez shared his carpentry skills to build small improvements. Scout remained in his cardboard box, but it was no longer a shelter of abandonment. It had become a headquarters for hope. People would find him there each morning, ready to listen, ready to offer the kind of presence that heals. He had taught them that sometimes the most important medicine is simply being seen, being acknowledged, being valued for who you are rather than what you can provide. The truth about abandoned dogs that Scout revealed was this: they are not broken beings waiting to be fixed. They are whole beings who have been freed to fulfill their deepest purpose. They are not victims of human cruelty, but teachers of human possibility. They show us that love is not about perfect circumstances, but about perfect presence. They demonstrate that loyalty is not about staying in comfort, but about showing up wherever healing is needed. Scout's original family eventually heard about his story. They came to visit, fearful that they had made a terrible mistake. But when they saw Scout surrounded by his chosen family, when they witnessed the healing he had created, when they understood the purpose he had found, they knew they had made the right choice. They had loved him enough to let him become who he was meant to be. Sarah, Scout's original young owner, knelt beside him just as her father had done weeks earlier. But this time, there were no tears of goodbye. There were tears of understanding. She whispered to Scout that she was proud of him, that she loved him, that she finally understood what real love meant. It meant wanting the best for someone even when that meant letting them go. Scout's tail wagged in the same gentle, understanding way it had when they first left him. But now that wag meant something different. It meant gratitude. It meant recognition. It meant the acknowledgement that sometimes love looks like abandonment, and sometimes abandonment looks like love. The cardboard box remains in the alley, but it's no longer weathered and torn. It's reinforced with love, decorated with hope, and filled with purpose. Scout still sleeps there each night, but he's no longer alone. He's surrounded by the dreams of everyone he has touched, the healing he has facilitated, the love he has made possible. If Scout's story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed an act of unexpected kindness from an animal? Or maybe you have your own story of finding purpose in abandonment. Stories like Scout's remind us that sometimes what looks like ending is actually beginning, and sometimes the most profound healing happens in the most unlikely places. If you enjoyed this journey with Scout and his chosen family, consider subscribing to our channel for more stories that challenge the way we think about love, loyalty, and belonging. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful tales that reveal the extraordinary in the ordinary. And who knows, your own story of transformation might inspire our next episode. Until next time, remember that sometimes being abandoned is not about being unwanted. Sometimes it's about being released into your true purpose. The truth no one told you about abandoned dogs. The old cardboard box shuddered in the wind, its edges torn and weathered from 3 days of rain. Inside, a golden retriever named Scout pressed his nose against the soggy flaps, watching the world through a narrow gap. His amber eyes held a wisdom that seemed impossible for a dog who had only known 18 months of life. But Scout wasn't just any dog. He was waiting for something that would change everything anyone thought they knew about abandon. Animals. The alley behind Morrison's grocery store wasn't much to look at. Broken glass sparkled like cruel stars between puddles of murky water. The dumpster beside Scout's makeshift shelter overflowed with the remnants of human carelessness, moldy bread, spoiled milk, and dreams that had been thrown away just like he had been. But Scout didn't see the ugliness. He saw possibility. He saw the small sparrow that visited him each morning, chirping a greeting that sounded almost like encouragement. He saw the way sunlight occasionally broke through the clouds, casting golden patches on the wet pavement. Most importantly, he saw the people who walked past, each carrying their own invisible burdens. Scout had been left here by a family who claimed they couldn't afford to keep him anymore. The father had knelt down, tears streaming down his weathered face, and whispered an apology that Scout felt deep in his bones. The mother had turned away, unable to watch. The little girl had cried so hard that Scout had tried to comfort her, pressing his warm body against her legs one last time. They had driven away in their dented sedan, leaving behind more than just a dog. They had left behind a piece of their hearts. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Scout understood. He understood the eviction notice that had been taped to their door. He understood the medical bills stacked on the kitchen counter. He understood the way his family had looked at him with a mixture of love and desperation, knowing they had to choose between keeping their home and keeping him. Scout had seen the way his young owner, Sarah, had stopped eating her favorite cookies, saving them for him instead. He had watched her father work double shifts, coming home exhausted and defeated. He had felt the tension in the household growing, thicker each day, like smoke from a fire that couldn't be put out. So when they brought him to this alley, Scout didn't run after their car. He didn't bark or whine. He simply watched them go, his tail giving one small understanding wag. Because sometimes loving someone means letting them make the impossible choice. Sometimes being loyal means accepting that you might have to be loyal from a distance. The first night in the box had been the longest of Scout's life. Every sound made him hope it was his family returning. Every pair of headlights that swept across the alley made his heart race with anticipation. But as the hours passed, Scout began to notice something else. He began to notice the other stories unfolding around him. The homeless woman who slept behind the flower shop spoke to invisible companions, her voice carrying the weight of a mind that had been broken by circumstances beyond her control. The teenage boy who cut through the alley each evening walked with his head down, his backpack heavy with more than just books. The elderly man who shuffled past each morning seemed to be carrying the entire world on his shoulders. Scout realized that he wasn't the only one who had been abandoned. The alley was full of souls that society had forgotten, each struggling with their own version of that cardboard box. But unlike the others, Scout had something they didn't. He had the ability to see hope where others saw only despair. He had the instinct to love unconditionally, even when that love wasn't returned. He had the gift of being present in a way that humans often struggle to achieve. On the second day, Scout made his first friend. Mrs. Chun, an elderly woman who owned the small flower shop, had been taking out her trash when she noticed the box. She approached slowly, her arthritis making each step deliberate and careful. When she saw Scout inside, her eyes filled with tears. But instead of pity, Scout saw recognition. Mrs. Chun understood what it meant to be left behind. Her husband had passed away 2 years ago, and her children lived in different states, too busy with their own lives to visit. She was surrounded by beautiful flowers that bloomed and died in endless cycles, a daily reminder of the temporary nature of all things. Mrs. Chun didn't have much, but she shared what she could. A small bowl of water, some leftover rice from her dinner. But more importantly, she shared her presence. She would sit on the small stool outside her shop and talk to Scout, telling him about her late husband, about the garden they had tended together, about the grandchildren she rarely saw. Scout listened with the kind of attention that humans rarely gave each other. He didn't judge or offer solutions. He simply acknowledged her pain with his quiet presence. Through Mrs. Chun, Scout learned that abandonment wasn't always about being unloved. Sometimes it was about circumstances beyond anyone's control. Sometimes it was about people doing the best they could with impossible situations. Mrs. Chun's children hadn't abandoned her out of cruelty. They had their own families to support, their own struggles to manage. Just like Scout's family hadn't abandoned him out of lack of love. They had simply run out of options. The third day brought a different kind of challenge. A group of teenagers had discovered Scout's hiding place and decided to have some fun with the abandoned dog. They threw rocks at his box, laughed when he flinched, and made cruel comments about his appearance. Scout's fur was matted from the rain, and his ribs were beginning to show from 3 days of sparse eating. He looked like what people expected abandoned dogs to look like: pitiful, desperate, broken. But Scout surprised them. Instead of cowering or running, he slowly emerged from his box and approached the teenagers. His tail wasn't wagging, but it wasn't tucked between his legs either. He looked directly at the leader of the group, a boy named Marcus, whose eyes held the same kind of pain Scout had seen in so many faces in this alley. Marcus raised another rock, ready to throw it, but something in Scout's gaze stopped him. It was understanding. It was the recognition that they were more alike than different, Marcus's hand slowly lowered. He had been abandoned too, in his own way. His father had left when he was 7. His mother worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, leaving him to raise himself on the streets. The anger he felt toward an abandoned dog was really anger toward his own situation, his own sense of being unwanted. But Scout didn't reflect that anger back at him. Instead, Scout offered something Marcus had forgotten: existed unconditional acceptance. The other teenagers grew uncomfortable with the silence. They called Marcus names and accused him of being soft. But Marcus knelt down and extended his hand toward Scout. The dog approached slowly, carefully, and gently pressed his nose against the boy's palm. It was a moment of recognition between 2 souls who had learned to survive on their own. Marcus whispered an apology, not just to Scout, but to all the things he had hurt in his own pain. That evening, Marcus returned alone. He brought a sandwich he had bought with his lunch money and sat beside Scout's box. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. Sometimes presence is enough. Sometimes the most profound connections happen without words. Marcus told Scout about his mother, about how hard she worked, about how he wished he could do more to help her. Scout listened with the same attention he had given Mrs. Chin, understanding that Marcus needed to be heard just as much as the elderly woman did. As the days passed, Scout's small corner of the alley became a gathering place for the forgotten. Mrs. Chun would visit during her lunch break, bringing small portions of food and sharing stories of her past. Marcus would stop by after school, doing his homework while Scout rested beside him. The homeless woman, who Scout learned was named Janet, began to acknowledge his presence with small nods and occasional smiles. Even the elderly man, Mr. Rodriguez, started to pause during his morning walks, offering Scout gentle words in Spanish that sounded like prayers. Scout began to understand something that would change everything. He wasn't just an abandoned dog waiting for rescue. He was a bridge between broken souls, a catalyst for connection in a world that had forgotten how to see each other. His presence created a safe space where people could acknowledge their own abandonment, their own struggles, their own need for unconditional love. He was teaching them something profound about the nature of belonging. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after Scout had been left in the alley. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a veterinarian who ran a small clinic across town, had been contacted by Mrs. Chun. The elderly woman had pulled together what little money she had with contributions from Marcus and even Janet, who had given her last $5. They wanted to get Scout checked by a professional to make sure he was healthy enough to survive on his own. Dr. Martinez arrived, expecting to find a typical abandoned dog case, an animal traumatized by neglect, possibly aggressive from fear, certainly malnourished, and in need of immediate medical attention. What she found instead challenged every assumption she had about abandoned animals. Scout approached her with confidence, his tail wagging gently, his eyes bright with intelligence, and something that looked remarkably like contentment.